Kathleen बोल रही है क्या?
Good morning, everyone. You've joined yet another show, Question Worth Asking, and I'm coming live to you from Philanthropy University, Oakland, California. And today I have my guest, Kathleen Janus. Good morning, Kathleen.
Good morning, Kanishka. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And just to give you a little background about Kathleen, Kathleen is an award-winning social entrepreneur, author, and an attorney, lecturer at Stanford University, and also she's a mother. She's an expert on philanthropy and scaling early-stage organizations. Also, Kathleen is a co-founder of Spark, a nonprofit focused on building a community of young global people promoting gender equality. Her latest book, Social Startup Success, How the Best Nonprofits Launch and Make a Difference. She had surveyed more than 200 high-performing social entrepreneurs and interviewed dozens of founders for this work. And we were very honored to have her here for like a brown bag session, and we learned tons of things, and that's what made us to read Kathleen and share this with a wider audience all around the world. So we have few callers joining from, again, different regions of the world. So I welcome each and everyone, and I take this opportunity again to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And guys, please go ahead, introduce yourself. Elle?
Hi, my name is Elle Tusi. I am a journalist and also the founder of In 1 Minute. In 1 Minute, we're doing the female narrative that we're exposing to do, and we want to provide mobile solutions using blockchain technology to empower their identity. That's what we focus on, their female identity. Yeah, and right now we're working on launching in January, and I think in February, March, we have a special project called Elite that we're currently working on now. So I'm really excited, and we're looking forward to empowering women globally.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, hi, I'm Nikita. I'm from India, west part of India, a city called Baroda. And I'm an engineer by profession. I'm working as an instrumentation engineer with a German company. But from last 3 years, I'm working on something called Cycling Cities, where I'm cycling to work from last 3.5 years. And I'm working on this Cycling Cities project to get more people start using cycles for commute. Because right now, cycles are only looked upon as a poor man's vehicle or just for recreation or exercise. So how you can use it for short distance commutes, I'm working on that. I've done few pilots in different events. And recently, I was appointed as the bicycle mayor for my city by an organization in Amsterdam called Cyclespace. So it's a huge bicycle mayor network globally. We have different bicycle mayors from cities like Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Sydney, Amsterdam, and Kenya in US. So this is empowering me to get more connections with people and also with government to execute things in a much fast-track manner. And I'm right now working on project with corporates and those people who are facing challenges while cycling on ground. So connecting everyone to find out challenges and then solve them.
Thank you. Thank you. And we have another caller joining from India, Shivai. I think we're having some technical difficulties. Can you hear us? Can you hear us? Okay. Unfortunately, he cannot see. We'll try to get it sorted out. In the meantime, I'm going to go into my first question, Kathleen, because I'm very mindful we have just about like 50 minutes or so, and I have like so many questions to sort of speed through. So the first question comes to you from Aisa Fatima. She's joining from Pakistan, and she wants to know, I would like to know, how did you started your journey, as you have been in a lawyer, founder of a nonprofit, a mother, and a lecturer? How do you juggle all these roles and stay focused? Could you please share your secret and some practices?
I wish there were a secret to that success. That has to be my next book, to try and figure out how to juggle it all. Well, thank you so much for having me. First of all, it's really exciting to be in front of such a global audience, and the work that you do at Philanthropy University, educating folks all over the world who want to make a difference, is really important and incredible, and community building and skills building and all of that is so critical to allowing us the conditions so that we can all be successful in solving some of these really hard, pressing social problems. So thank you for that and for what you do. Well, with regard to the juggling act, I don't know that I have a great answer for that. Except for that, it really comes down to getting a lot of help where you can. My husband is an incredible partner. And, I think it also comes down to really being passionate about what you do. I mean, I have been so lucky to be able to create this kind of like portfolio of work that I love. So I think in past generations, so many people have thought of work as a job that you apply for and you work at for many, many years. And, nowadays as entrepreneurs, we really get to choose our job and make our job description. And so for me personally, I'm super passionate about teaching. I love teaching at Stanford. I love my students. It's very inspiring to me to be inspired by their enthusiasm and excitement about the changing the world. But teaching isn't everything for me. Sometimes, it can feel a little bit isolating in the halls of Stanford. And so getting out into the world and working with organizations that are actually doing the work is also very, very important to me. And I think ultimately makes me a better teacher and a better mother, because my kids, see me doing this really important work and want to make a difference. We recently, in the fires of Northern California, sadly, my childhood neighborhood burned down in Napa. And so ultimately, we were all called to action to do something for so many people who were so vulnerable in that time. And so my kids held a pizza party at the park. We raised $25 gift cards, and we were able to raise $5,000 from just normal people who stepped up and wanted to give back to the community. It was such an amazing time to see that when disaster strikes and when we're facing these really hard social problems, that we only see each other's humanity. We don't see divisions. And so that gives me a lot of hope and inspiration as I think about just kind of making a difference generally and incorporating that in every single level of my life. So that's a long way to say that maybe it sounds like it's a juggle and I'm doing so many different things, but to me, it all just seems like this way of where can I have the most impact, making a difference in whatever capacity I can.
Oh, thank you. And Shubha, can you hear me now? Hear me? Seems he can't hear. Yeah, sorry. So the second question comes to you, Kathleen, from Ricardo Johnson, and he's sent in his question from Jamaica. So he wants to know what are the things that keeps potential social entrepreneurs from succeeding their potential?
Can you repeat the question one more time? I think we had some noise in the background.
The question is, what are the things that keeps potential social entrepreneurs from succeeding to fulfill their potential?
Is your computer try correctly?
I want to make sure we get rid of the background noise. So for me, one of the things that has been most interesting in this research that I've done, and maybe giving you a little bit of a background on my research would help frame this question. So I started a small nonprofit in San Francisco called Spark, and we were 25 and really wanted to give back to grassroots women's organizations around the world who were making a difference in their communities. And so we got together with a group of friends, never intended to start an organization. Like I think so many social entrepreneurs, it was really coming from this need of wanting to provide young people in our community the opportunity to give back in meaningful ways. And realized that actually an organization would be needed in order to do this. And we had our first event to support a group of women who were rebuilding their lives after the genocide. And we had lines around the block and people who really wanted to get involved. So we started charging them a membership fee, and we built an organization out of it. And quickly we realized that you can't have an organization unless you have someone running it. And so we had to raise the money to hire an executive director. And then that unleashed a whole level of potential. So we were able to grow exponentially. Every single few months, we were doubling our revenue. And then quickly after that, we hit a wall. And it was just when we hit our stride and we knew that we had a model that was working, that we hit this wall. And we couldn't get the funding that we needed to grow our impact. So fast forward several years, when I was working at Stanford and wearing my research cap, I started to wonder, well, what is this wall and who are the organizations that are getting past this wall? And I found out in my research that actually 2/3 of nonprofits in the United States are $500,000 and below in revenue. And in the United States, of course, $500,000 means something very different. I think there's a lot of organizations around the world that would be very happy with $500,000 in revenue. In the United States, those are small community-based organizations. Those are mom and pop stores. And there is a very important role for mom and pop stores in the nonprofit community, organizations that are serving communities on a very specific level. But so many of those ideas are incredible ideas that have proven impact that need to scale. And so that led me to this question that I think your Ricardo in Jamaica asked, which is what is it that prevents certain organizations from scaling, and which are the ones that are getting over this hump? And so I spent the last 5 years trying to understand the answer to that question. And, the short answer is, if you ask organizations what their number one challenge is across the board, 81% of them say their biggest challenge is access to capital. And that can be for a lot of different reasons. It could be because people don't have the networks. It could be because people aren't living in a place where they might have access to capital that they need to run their organizations. It could be that they just don't have a good idea, which is also, the market working, I guess. But I actually believe that there's also a certain set of foundations that you need to lay as an organization in order to prepare yourself to raise that capital. So in the book, I talk about testing impact, testing ideas, measuring impact, funding experimentation to figure out your fundraising model, leading, collecting a really good distributive leadership model, and storytelling. And that's ultimately what helps prepare organizations to get to that next level of success.
Thank you. And that's a good segue for Elle. She's all about storytelling. She's doing some amazing work. And I'm like a new fan of her work, following her website and so forth. So Elle, go ahead and, ask your question.
I know, as you were answering, I kind of felt, oh my God, I should probably ask my question, because one of the struggles that I have is having access to capital early in the game. And I was approached to possibly do a hybrid structure. So my question to you is, when is it a good idea to do a hybrid structure for a nonprofit, and what would be your recommendations for that?
And can I ask you a question back? So when you say hybrid structure, how do you define it? Just so we can be clear for the audience.
So the reason why I say that is because some of the work that we do, we don't have access to getting into incubators. I've been approached by incubators saying, oh, your concept, we want you to be a part of this. And I go all the way through the application process. And when they find out I'm a nonprofit and get no capital or equity in my venture, I don't have that opportunity. So, and then I feel as if there's, whether you classify it as a social enterprise, it can also be something similar to that, where we can provide where we can bring in revenue. And something that someone had told me before was, you can do this hybrid structure where you can have like a business entity where you're bringing in revenue and it feeds into your nonprofit social mission, your mission and vision. And so when was that a good idea to do that? And what's a good way to approach that?
Okay, that's very helpful context. Thanks, Al. And that's a really, really important question that a lot of organizations are really struggling with nowadays. And I see it with my students at Stanford all the time, that people no longer see barriers between for-profit and nonprofit, that people want to make an impact, and they are really just interested in what's the structure that's going to help me make the most impact. I mean, we saw recently with the Chan Zuckerberg initiative, they created this huge splash when Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, ended up creating an LLC as the vehicle, so a corporate structure as the vehicle to do his philanthropy. So I think this is really exciting that we're thinking outside the box in terms of legal structures. But I think it also, when it comes down to being a very small nonprofit like you are, that the questions are a lot harder, because you don't necessarily have the same access to the same lawyers that Mark Zuckerberg does to help, figure out these legal structures. So as a threshold question, I think what it comes down to is, where is your access to capital going to be most accessible? And maybe even before that, what is your primary mission? And what is your theory of change? So in Social Startup Success, which you should all order, because I have a very nice chart that kind of goes through some of these different legal options and talks about the difference between for-profit and nonprofit and hybrid organizations. What I say is that the best organizations that tend to kind of get past this threshold of what I call in the book as $2 million and below and above as kind of a baseline level of sustainability in the United States, at least, is that organizations early on, it's all about the testing process. It's all about figuring what is going to be the funding model that is going to help you get to the next level. And for every organization, that's going to be different. There is no one-size-fits-all funding model for nonprofit or for-profit organizations. And so you have to be laser focused on what your mission is and understanding what your mission is, because you can't figure out where you're going to get money until you know what your mission is. Once you know what that is, then it's all about trying different things, trying earned revenue streams, trying philanthropic income. When a lot of the organizations that I interviewed went through the 2008 recession, foundation grants tanked with the Dow Jones. And that was a big problem, because a lot of organizations that were fully reliant on philanthropic funding went under at that time, or had to merge, or had to oftentimes just close their doors. And so for a lot of organizations that did have earned income during that time, it was a really critical source of sustainability when they didn't know where their next grant check was coming from. But for some organizations, earned income isn't going to be possible. When you're solving human rights injustices, people aren't necessarily going to pay for their human rights. People will pay for water. People will pay for food, and people will pay for products that they need to live. And so you need to kind of look at, well, is there a way to charge for my services? Is there a way to sell a product? Or is there a third party who would be willing to pay for the services that benefits from those services as well. And there's a lot of ways that you can test out those options, but you always have to be thinking, are my revenue generating activities adding to the mission, or are they taking away from it? Because a big problem with focusing on earned income is that oftentimes that will result in mission drift.
Is there like an example of a hybrid structure that you think they did it right? Sorry, my follow-up.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So let me give you an example of an organization that did this well. Hot Bread Kitchen in New York is a training program for low-income women who want to get into the food industry. When Jessamine Rodriguez founded this organization in the heart of Harlem, she had this idea actually that it was going to be 100% sustainable on earned income. She had a cafe where she sold the bread that the women were making in the training program. And then the proceeds went back into the training program. She had wholesale. So she sold to places like JetBlue and Whole Foods. And this earned income, again, went back into the training program. And she had an incubator where small businesses were able to rent some space and then make food and then go sell it in farmers markets and other small markets. So she had these 3 sources of earned income, which were all really critical to sustaining the organization. But she quickly realized that she was selling herself short by refusing to accept philanthropic dollars. So including some philanthropic income in the model, she was able to enhance it and make it even better than if she just tried to sustain it on the earned income. So for example, she included childcare for her trainees so that they didn't have to worry about who was taking care of their kids while they were doing their job training. She extended the program longer beyond when it was profitable because it was better for the women. It was a better training program and enhanced their chances for long-term success, even though it wasn't necessarily the profitable thing to do. So she never would have figured that out if she hadn't, in that beginning stage, kind of tested to get to this place where actually for them, their funding model is that 65% of their income comes from earned income, and then another 35% comes from philanthropic capital.
Al, you're good? Do you have any follow-up questions?
I have a lot, but I will let others ask their questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. Kathleen, the next question comes to you from Ellen Heldon. She's from Canada, and she wants to know what barriers most often occur in social entrepreneurship.
What barriers?
Yes.
Sorry.
What barriers most often occur in social entrepreneurship?
What barriers most often occur? Well, I think this gets back to the question about access to, and I think it's actually a big problem in the sector, because what I noticed in writing my book is that often it's a lot of the same kinds of people who get funded. It's people who have access to certain networks. It's people who Ivy League degree and know how to speak this language of theory of change and measuring impact and human-centered design, that community-based leaders who don't have access to the halls of an Ivy League education might not know. And so this is actually a real problem that I think the philanthropic sector is really broken, because it's privileging a certain set of traits and skills that are not necessarily best suited to solve the social problems that we are trying to solve. That's not to mention bias. That's another big barrier in the sector. Echoing Green has some amazing research that came out that shows that male-led organizations tend to raise twice as much 5 years after starting their organization than female-led organizations. And the same is true for white-led organizations versus organizations led by people of color. This is a real problem, and there isn't an incentive amongst philanthropists to open up their portfolios like Google did with their diversity numbers and show what's actually happening under the hood. So I think we need to start thinking about how can we find more data on this and how can we identify it as a problem, because I don't think that it's really spoken about, and then do something about it. And I think we all have a role in playing to push back on foundations that require certain that do create barriers for entry for others.
And just when you mentioned about Echoing Green, I read a very interesting piece you have written, I think last month in November. It's about 5 pieces of startup advice from social entrepreneurs, where you have mentioned stay true to your mission, build a team, think big even when you're small, don't overplan, be patient, and practice self-care. So that's a good article. I think I ask everyone to sort of go Google it and read. That's what I mean. Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that, Kathleen?
Well, it's just been so much fun to talk with all of these really successful organizations, and I'll just add, since you had Beth Cantor on recently, a plug for her book, The Healthy Happy Nonprofit, which I read recently and got so much out of. I mean, I think of myself as kind of a self-care queen. I try and take care of myself, but there were a lot of great tips that she had on turning notifications off on your phone and going for walking meetings. And I actually have an article on that too that you can Google or find on my website at KathleenJanus.com. So I would just really emphasize that self-care point, because we can't take care of other people until we can take care of ourselves.
Yeah, actually, we practice pretty much everything when it comes to self-care here at Philanthropy. So we have all walking meetings, to a lot of digital detoxing. So it's yeah. And I'm sorry, I had a copy of your book, and one of my colleagues on vacation has taken the book, so I don't have it to show. But we read, and we had a broadback session, and we learned.
Oh yeah.
You have a copy? Yeah. Please show. Yeah, that'll be great. That book.
It comes out January 16th, and it's available already on Amazon, and you can find out more on my website, KathleenJanus.com.
Great.
Can I ask a really quick question?
Yeah.
Because you had mentioned something about building the team, and it's one of the most important elements for when you first start. Now, when you don't have enough capital or funds to bring in your dream team, how do you maintain the volunteers in the beginning and for them to be motivated to stay on when at the very beginning you may not?
That's exactly my question.
Oh, okay.
Oh, is it? I'm so sorry.
Then, probably Nikita. Yeah, I saw that. So you can ask.
No, she said that exactly line by line. That's the same question I have.
Nikita, go ahead with your question. And then can ask.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask the same. Like, I don't have a business model right now in place, and I'm also being suggested by a lot of mentors to have a hybrid model. But somehow the kind of things I did till now, they had a little revenue, but not that sustainable that I can call it as a business model. So, and I have parallelly done things which are not for profit. So there is not like a very great structure which is scalable for my city and for other cities to follow. So I think there is more testing needed. But in that process, I have people who have joined me, left, and since I'm also part-time, I tried to be full-time, but somehow I got a lot of suggestions that once a model should be in place, then I should leave the job. But I don't know what would be the right model, and after how many testings I would see that this is one thing which should be done, or maybe there would be parallel revenue streams which would be there and parallel activities which are needed. So for that also, we need to have a right team or a set of volunteers. But to manage the volunteers is a little difficult thing. I created the Bicycle Mayor Action Force also, but again, like half of them are students, half of them are engineers, and all these things are there. But the commitment is not like it's my baby, so I am spending my 24 hours on it. I don't mind. But expecting that kind of commitment from others is little difficult. So how to maintain that? Like you have to do a lot of follow-ups and everything, and then so there is nothing in return. They are doing it for cause, but again, there needs to be some measured commitment, which is not there always in everyone's case. So you will find 1 out of 100 who has that genuine commitment. So how to manage the team, form the team, and take it ahead in a much faster way.
Absolutely, Nikita. I totally get it. Volunteers are crapshoot. You have no idea if they're gonna, follow through or totally leave you hanging. And and in a way, it puts you in a tough position, because when you don't have a lot of resources for the organization, you have no choice but to try and trust people, because you can't do it all yourself and you need to get help. This was something we really struggled with very early on with Spark. We didn't have full-time staff. I was a practicing lawyer at the time. I had a corporate job where I was responsible for billing $2,200 a year. And same thing as you, it was my baby. That was fine. I was happy to work on it, at all hours of the day and night, but I still needed more help. And a lot of organizations struggle with this for very different reasons. Kiva struggled with this very early on because they had the horrible problem of raising $11 million overnight when Jessica Jackley and Matt Flannery appeared on the Oprah show. And it literally crashed their servers because so many people wanted to donate, which sounds like a great problem to have, but very early on forced them to rely on volunteers because they didn't have the staff, and a lot of those dollars were committed directly to microfinance institutions. And so they had to figure out how to raise the money to hire for the infrastructure to support that. And so having structure around the volunteer process is really, really critical. And I'll give a couple of examples. So one of the things that I talk about in the book is getting other people to raise money for you. I love the example of Room to Read, which is a $50 million now literacy organization that was founded by John Wood when he went on a trucking expedition to Nepal and found this school that had 450 kids and very few books. And so he went back to his family and friends and said, we have to give these kids books. And he rallied them to donate 3,000 books. And then he took them back to Nepal, and he realized that he really had something because he was people were giving so easily that they were donating because they could see the results of their donation. And so they built an entire fundraising model around chapters. They have chapters all over the world, and they bring their volunteers to San Francisco once a year for their version of the annual sales conference. But it's really, it's about inspiring them. It's about giving them stories that they can go back and tell to their community. It's about giving them fundraising tools. By giving them that fundraising training, they were actually giving the volunteers something, not just getting something from the volunteers. So that was a really critical hook for engagement. And then those volunteers go back and raise money, and they raise 25% of that $50 million budget every single year for Room to Read. This doesn't have to happen at this kind of grand scale level. For Spark, really early on, we also struggled with this because we didn't have full-time staff, as I said. And we started what we called the Spark Champions program, where we put some structure around and asked our friends to commit to raising $1,000 for Spark. And then we gave them fundraising training. We helped organize their events. If we could, we brought people to their events to help support them. We promoted them online. And so it was a way to get to put some structure around it, but then also give people a really tangible goal that they could work for and create community around it. These Spark Champions get to work together. They get to cheer each other on as they go. And so creating that community is also a really critical way to get people involved. The last thing I'll say is that your board of directors can be your biggest champions when you don't have a staff. And I think a lot of people really struggle with trying to figure out how to leverage their board. They maybe don't have the right people on their board. They just have friends and family around them and who are just going to kind of tell them what they want to hear and not actually step up and help. And they oftentimes don't have very clear expectations of their board of directors. So what is your board policy so that you can outline very clearly what you want your board to raise every year, how many meetings you want them to attend, and by putting this all up front and creating kind of an agreement that they sign, they're committing in a much more formal way that then also allows you to go back to them later on and say, you said you were going to show up to these meetings and you didn't. Maybe this isn't the right fit. And shifting from that mentality of feeling like you have to convince people to be on your board and actually having an honest conversation when it's not working, because it just doesn't help anybody to have people on the board who aren't performing. And when I'm talking about board, I mean that very loosely. Like, even if you don't have a formal organization with a legally required board, you can have an informal board of directors with the same kind of requirements.
Right.
Nikita, do you have any?
What is informal? Yeah, informal board of directors. I did not get that point. Like, how do you?
So do you have a formalized organization where you need a board of directors?
Not yet.
Not yet.
In the process. Not sure. Like, if I should go for an NGO model or not-for-profit model, or I should go for another entity. I mean, I want to go for a hybrid model definitely, but none of the entities is ready yet. So.
Yeah. So in that case, it's a really critical time for you to already be engaging people that you think you might want to eventually serve on your board. And those advisors in the early days are really critical because you can test each other out. Like, you can have someone helping you with your finances, and if they don't step up and get you the finances that you need on time, then don't ask them to be the treasurer of your board. On the flip side of it, if you find someone who you're working with who is really stepping it up and is able to provide you great advice, well, that's someone who could absolutely be on your board later on. So, and it's kind of a nice practice. Sometimes I'll say it's a practice board before you have to bring them on. For real, they get to kind of test things out and begin to lay the foundation for setting up the board policy and all the organizational policies before they actually even have to start serving. So it's a really important time.
Thank you, Nikita, and thank you, Kathleen. Shivai, I think finally we can hear you now.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Great. So can you first introduce yourself? Take about 3 minutes and introduce yourself, what you do, where you work, and then you can ask your question from Kathleen.
Yes. Hello, friends. My name is Shivai, and I'm a student at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Tuljapur campus. And our campus focuses on rural development. So we get a lot of exposure to work in the fields, to work with rural communities. And I've been very fortunate to have interned in various projects related to livelihood, gender issues, and water and sanitation. Currently, We are trying to test a qualitative research app in the rural Maharashtra, uh, which is a project from Arizona State University. And my question is, like I've seen many NGOs, they don't have the right infrastructure to conduct research, so they rely on anecdotal evidence. So can you tell me, like, is it possible to conduct evaluation research with limited resources and how to go about it?
Absolutely. This is something that I really highlight in social startup success. I think a lot of social entrepreneurs go into this work because they love working with people, they love developing the programming. They are typically not data scientists and typically not researchers with a PhD. And that can be really overwhelming because, you know, you're hearing all of this noise telling you you've got to show me your data and show me what impact you're having. And data is easy to collect nowadays, but hard to use. So 75% of nonprofits out there say that they collect data to measure the impact of their work. Only 6% think that they're actually making good use of that data. So it's really hard, and we have a big education need in the sector to help people figure out what to do with their data so that we can show whether work is having an impact, because ultimately if it's not having an impact, then what are we doing? And we have very limited resources as a sector, so we need to make sure that we are being as absolutely efficient as possible with those resources. So just because you don't have a PhD in data science it doesn't mean that you can't measure your impact. So let me give you an example of an organization I interviewed that did that really well. Braven is an organization that helps low-income students who are going to college to get jobs through mentoring and through training to help them with things like resumes and building their networks. And so they wanted to show that their programs were having the intended effect of helping people graduate on a higher rate and also helping people get jobs at a higher rate. When they started this program, they had a class full of freshmen. And so they had no idea. They were going to have to wait 4 years to see whether they were actually having their intended impact. But they couldn't wait because they had to get funded and they had to show funders that they were making a difference. And so what they did was they looked at what are the key questions that can tell us whether we're on progress to make impact. So for example, they measured things like attendance to determine whether organizations were, whether the students were going to actually graduate. They measured things like whether a mentor would recommend their mentee for a job as an indicator toward whether those mentees would actually get jobs after the fact. So they had this really great set of metrics that was showing that they were on track. But the key to developing great metrics isn't just to rest on your laurels and pat yourself on the back because your students are doing really well. Let's look at what would have happened if your students hadn't participated in your programs. Maybe you're just choosing the students who would have done well anyway for whatever reason because they're really driven or they have a family that is helping them behind the scenes. And so what Braven did to try and test this was they did a control group and they looked at students who, for whatever reason, couldn't participate in their program. And they gave them a $25 Amazon gift card. And every few months, they would send them a survey to see how they were doing. And they were able to show, using this very informal control group, that their students were actually performing at a much higher rate, participating in their programs. So there's these little tricks that you can use that don't have to be so sophisticated. And I think this is where a lot of people get really nervous in measuring impact. but it doesn't have to be such a fancy kind of impact metric system. That you can do a lot with very informal surveys and with control groups that will show whether you're having an impact.
But then there are like questions of reliability. So in research, like we have randomized control trials, but it requires sophisticated statistics and all. But if we do it informally, so how are we going to convey this to our funders? Like, what was our methodology? Is it acceptable in our field?
Yeah, randomized control trials are expensive. I mean, there are organizations who have done them. For those of you who don't know what a randomized control trial is, it's this idea of really, like I was just saying, testing whether what you're doing is working against a control group of individuals who don't participate in your programs and seeing if there's an actual measurable difference. So it's the gold standard in research to do a randomized control trial. But organizations that I interviewed that are doing them are in the tens of millions of dollars often in annual revenue, because it can cost to do an RCT. And honestly, you can a good part of the way there without having to actually perform such a rigorous analysis. I think there's also the problem is that the testing phase of really trying to understand your model is ongoing in those early years. So once you do an RCT, you're sticking your stake in the ground and saying, okay, this is what we're doing. Let's see if it works. A lot of organizations aren't really ready to do that until many years into testing and tweaking. And let's remember that it is not just about proving what you're doing is working. It's also about improving your model and seeing what's not working and tweaking it and changing your program so that you can see what does work. And so that whole process is really, really critical to that early stage of social innovation, and ultimately is the essence of social entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship exists so that we can test ideas at a very small and nimble level that governments never could, because they don't have the capacity to be nimble. Nimble is not a way that anyone would ever describe a government. So, and so that's really important to do that testing before you get to that phase where you want to put that stake in the ground and saying, okay, I think we've got something that works. Let's do a rigorous impact assessment.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shivai, and thank you, Kathleen. And my next question, actually, you are in a better position to answer this question because you are partly attached to academia as well. So the question comes to you from Diana, and she's from US. She wants to know, do you see a job market for students trained in social innovation, social entrepreneurship, or is business school or law school or engineering school is still the way to go?
Well, as a trained lawyer who no longer uses my law degree, it was a very expensive 3 years. No, but I truly believe that social entrepreneurship is teachable. I wouldn't be teaching social entrepreneurship at Stanford if I didn't believe that. And my advice to students is always that you should do what you're passionate about. Don't go to law school if you don't want to practice law, because it's expensive and it's a waste of your time. Yes, it will give you tangible skills, and maybe ultimately it will be important to framing what you want to do. But don't go to law school or business school because you think you should. Do what you love, and then that's when you're really going to be most passionate about what you do.
Great, thanks. So the next question is another good segue again. The question comes to us from Nepal. She's Sabrina Panapla. She wants to know, what is entrepreneurial spirit?
Oh, it's a je ne sais quoi. I do think, so this is kind of contrary to my last answer, which is that I think social entrepreneurship is very teachable, that there are certain strategies that I talk about in my book that everybody can learn from to help give them a better propensity to succeed as social entrepreneurs. That said, it's not for everybody. Social entrepreneurship requires risk, and you have to be willing to fail because certain things don't work out, and this is all part of the testing process. And failure isn't for everybody. You know, for some people, it's going to be a much more satisfying experience to go into a role that might be more predictable. Entrepreneurial spirit is about risk taking. It's about trying new things and push forward new frontiers. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that don't necessarily involve giving up your job and living in poverty to do that too.
Great. So I'm being very mindful. We have about another 9 minutes and I have so many questions to go through. And also I apologize on behalf. A lot of people want to join, only we can accommodate like 5-6 people on Google Hangout. Some people couldn't make it due to technical difficulties today. And I know a lot of people out there watching live. So I hope this has been very helpful for you. And it's great to have you again, Kathleen. So the next question is from Mohammed Akram, and he's from Pakistan. He wants to know, will automation disrupt the social enterprises? Is this something we need to be mindful and be innovative in our programs and delivery? He works for a nonprofit.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think anybody knows the answer yet. I mean, automation is disrupting every sector. I heard this really interesting talk the other day about how things like car sales are disrupted, not because of the manufacturing of, we all know robots are doing a lot more of that, but people are buying their cars online. And so the car salesperson used to be the king of the lot. Yeah. And who was, you know, bringing in the most money on their sales revenue. And, you know, we all have our favorite jokes about car salesmen. But if you go into a car sales lot these days, there's not a lot of people hanging out because people don't need to go in person anymore necessarily. So I think it would be naive to say that the technology is going to have no impact on the nonprofits. But what I would say is that it's also really affecting nonprofits in a very positive way. There are some great tech nonprofits out there that are doing really important work. If you go to an organization called Fast Forward, it's a nonprofit accelerator in San Francisco. A list of all of the tech nonprofits that exist in the world that are using technology to solve really hard social problems. The problem that they've identified for tech nonprofits is that those that have to deal with not only all of the challenges that we all have to deal with starting a nonprofit. How do you build your board? How do you build your financing model? How do you measure your impact? They're also dealing with all the problems that come with starting a tech company. So they're trying to figure out their product. They're trying to figure out their market, their distribution model. So it's not surprising that actually there's not a lot of tech nonprofits, certainly not as many as you think. I don't know what the number is, but when they first did the survey, there were 240 in the entire world. Not many at all. So we think this is an area that's actually super ripe for opportunity, and that, you know, as more and more people go into the nonprofit sector who have a tech background, I think there's a lot of really exciting ideas. One example of a tech nonprofit is 1 Degree, started by a guy named Ray Faustino, who was a Filipino immigrant who saw his parents really struggle with trying to get social services and to work the system. He was often translating for them. You know, he was the one navigating the services for them. And so he said, what if we had a Yelp-like services, and that people could get online on this platform and rate, you know, health and human services and rate them, so that they could go and find the services they need much more quickly. And so he started this Yelp-like platform, and that's helping thousands of people in the Bay Area navigate the social system in a much more effective way. But I think that it's a really exciting time for nonprofits to be looking at different tech ideas to solve social problems.
Thank you. So the next question is from Prince David, and he had sent this message from the question from Nigeria. So he wants to know, it's a rather long question. I'm starting a social enterprise in Lagos, Nigeria, that will provide funding for SMEs at 2%, 5% interest rates. My prospective investors are insisting on getting 25% of the investment per annum, and they even insist on having their ROI every quarter. How can I get investors that would be patient enough to allow the enterprise to grow before making such demands? And secondly, I want to understand how to negotiate with investors without being cheated.
This is a hard question, because the power dynamics, whether you're working with investors, whether you're working with foundations, they have power that people without money do not. And that's kind of the way that our world operates, and that needs to change. And so I think there's a real donor education process that has to happen, both at the philanthropic level and at the investor level. And I do think that that's a role. I think that nonprofits and, you know, small social enterprises have more power than they think to educate donors throughout that process. Little tricks that I learned, for example, is really, you know, knowing what you stand for and knowing what you want and being really honest and clear about that. So, for example, one of the challenges with trying to solicit philanthropic dollars is that in meetings before, you know, with a funder, before they'll let you submit a request. And maybe at the end of those dozen meetings, they don't even let you submit a request for funding. And so that's just a huge waste of time. Nonprofits don't have the time to be meeting with funders a dozen times that don't even necessarily pan out. And so one organization that I talked to, the Workers Lab, does this thing where they say, you know, at the end of the second meeting, they say, is this going to lead to funding or not? Yeah. You know, and say, I don't want to waste your time, and I can't waste my time. And so having those really honest conversations can be really, really hard, but ultimately I think they're what we need to do in order to educate the sector. Because I think oftentimes I don't think funders really understand the impact that the negative impact that they're having on organizations.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. Unfortunately, this comes to an end because we don't have much time. We have a few minutes. So again, I take this opportunity on behalf of Philanthropy University, Kathleen, for taking time. And also, I love this book. It's been great. And actually, one of my colleagues right now on vacation, and she has taken it to read. And someone is reading your book, you know. Right,
it's being passed around the office.
Yeah, yeah, it's getting passed around. And we learned a lot from your book. And we are looking forward to have you again in one of our shows. That's and great. At our office. And also, I take this opportunity to say thank you for everyone who joined live and who are already now watching. And Kathleen, again, thank you so much. And is there any way people can stay in touch with you? How can they follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. If you go to my website, you can reach out and contact me. My website is Kathleen Janus, KathleenJanus.com. And that has all the information about my book, and it also has an evaluation toolkit that I've developed that you can download on the site, which helps you learn how far you are on the path to social startup success. So that's a great toolkit that you can download right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Then again, once more, thank you so much. And everyone, it's great to have you. And we are going to feature another interesting guest next month. And happy holidays, everyone. And happy New Year. This is our last show for this year. So take care and thank you so
Happy
much.
holidays.
Yeah, take care and bye from me.
Bye.
Great, thanks.